A few weeks ago, I had a chance to go to Saudi Arabia. And the first thing I wanted to do as a Muslim was to go to Mecca and visit the Kaaba, the holiest shrine of Islam. And I did that. I put on my ritualistic dress, I went to the Holy Mosque, I did my prayers, I observed all the rituals. And meanwhile, besides all the spirituality, there was one mundane detail in the Kaaba that was pretty interesting for me. There was no separation of sexes. In other words, man and woman were worshipping all together. They were together while doing the tawaf, the circular walk around the Kaaba. They were together while praying. And if you wonder why this is interesting at all, you have to see the rest of Saudi Arabia. Because this is a country which is strictly divided between the sexes. In other words, as men, you are not simply supposed to be in the same physical space with women. And I noticed this in a very funny way. I left the Kaaba to eat something in downtown Mecca. I headed to the nearest Burger King restaurant, and I went there. I noticed that there's a male section which is carefully separated from the female section, and I had to pay, order, and eat at the male section. It's funny, I said to myself, you can mingle with the opposite sex at the Holy Kaaba, but not at the Burger King? Quite ironic. Ironic, and it's also, I think, quite telling. Because the Kaaba and the rituals around it are relics from the earliest phase of Islam, that of Prophet Muhammad. And if there was a big emphasis at the time to separate men from women, the rituals around the Kaaba could have designed accordingly. But apparently, that was not an issue at the time. So the rituals came that way. This is also, I think, confirmed by the fact that the seclusion of women and creating a divided society is something that you also do not find in the Quran, the very core of Islam, the divine core of Islam that all Muslims, including myself, believe. And I think it's not an accident that you don't find this idea in the very origin of Islam, because many scholars who study the history of Islamic thought, Muslim scholars or Westerners, think that actually the practice of dividing man and woman physically came as a later development in Islam, as Muslims adopted some pre-existing cultures and traditions of the Middle East. Seclusion of women was actually a Byzantine and Persian practice, and Muslims adopted that and made that a part of their religion. And actually, this is just one example of a much larger phenomenon. What we call today Islamic law, and especially Islamic culture, and there are many Islamic cultures actually, the one in Saudi Arabia is much different from where I come from, Istanbul or Turkey. But still, I mean, if you're going to speak about a Muslim culture, this has a core, the divine message, which began the religion, but then many traditions, perceptions, many practices were added on top of it. And these were traditions of the Middle East, medieval traditions. And there are two important messages, I think, or two lessons to take from that, reality. First of all, Muslims, pious, conservative, believing Muslims who want to be loyal to their religion should not cling on to everything in their culture, thinking that that's divinely mandated. Maybe some things are bad traditions and they need to be changed. On the other hand, the Westerners who look at Islamic culture and see some troubling aspects should not readily conclude that this is what Islam ordains. Maybe it's a Middle Eastern culture that became confused with Islam.